Welcome to the Couple to Couple League PeakDay podcast, where we discuss fertility and natural family planning with our friends. Today's guests are Megan and Nick Nelson.
Absolutely. Freedom is such a misunderstood concept, I believe, in our culture today. Society teaches us that freedom is to do whatever you want. And freedom is actually the ability to choose and do what is right. And with the understanding of truth and beauty of NFP, we have actual freedom to choose what is right and good for us. And so learning NFP is so much more beautiful than anything that the secular world offers in they call freedom or choice. It's really just slave to desire. And NFP is true freedom when you know true beauty and the purpose of marriage and our fertility and the way that our bodies make. When you understand the way the Creator worked, it's a lot easier to understand what that true freedom is.
Right.
Yeah, and NFP, that like Megan said, that's true freedom. Whereas, in a secular sense, if you, rather than seeking to understand your fertility, you seek to control it and be the master of it. Well, really, you're not the master of it. You're just a slave to whatever pharmaceutical you're taking or whatever other contraceptive method you're using. You've now beholden yourself to that because you have no other way to, plan your family. So you've enslaved yourself to big pharma, if you want to say it. Yeah, NFP, that's true freedom.
Welcome to the PeakDay podcast, where we discuss fertility and natural family planning with our friends. Today's guest is John Bishop, founder and executive director of Forge.
So I want to answer that question very simply to get the main point across, and I'll give a little detail and go from there. So what has happened to men? Well, the sexual revolution has happened to men. The effeminization of the culture has happened to men. But as a part of that sexual revolution, I don't know of anything that is more negatively impacting men than contraception. And I want to say why. All right. So a lot of people just kind of take this to be a women's issue. I want to tell you a story that comes from my experience writing my dissertation, particularly that first bit of the doctoral dissertation on the crisis of men and masculinity. I was reading a man with a rather unfortunate name. So his name is Dr. Lionel Tiger, and he's an evolutionary sociologist, famed sociologist out of Rutgers University. No religious background whatsoever. And so I was reading this man. He wrote a book called The Decline of Males, okay, that chronicles kind of statistic by statistic how men are falling behind in education, falling behind in overall job performance, skyrocketing rates of male incarceration, prison time. Okay, so in every relevant stat, falling behind in rates of fatherhood. In the 1960s, the rate of American fatherlessness for children was 9%. It's now 25%. That means that 22.5 million kids in the United States right now are growing up without a resident father. Okay, and that has enormous negative impact across society. So I was reading this sociologist, Lionel Tiger, Decline of Males, and this guy, who's not a Catholic or anything like that, there's a key point in the book where he says, look, if there's any single kind of turn in human history that wrecked male flourishing, well, it's contraception. And, why does he say that? So he's kind of got an interesting take that maybe your listeners haven't heard before. So he actually says that kind of using language that the nerds listening to the podcast will recognize from Karl Marx, that what Marx says capitalism does. Now, I am not a believer in Karl Marx, so just for the record, I'm rehearsing an argument here. What Karl Marx says is that for an economy, what capitalism does to the working class members of that economy is it takes away the means of production. And for that reason, the working class, they don't care anymore. They have no ownership in the production process. They don't have a stake, if you will. They're kind of like, workers in McDonald's who they don't own anything. They just get an hourly wage. Of course, they don't care quite as much about the work that they do because of the manner in which they're allowed to participate in the production process, right? They don't take pride in the hamburger patties, in the same way that somebody who owns their own restaurant takes pride, in the way that they make a meal. Okay. Now, transfer that same line of thinking from production to reproduction. And this, again, completely non-religious sociologist says, well, that's what's happening to men when it comes to sex and when it comes to the family. Men, by virtue of their biology, are already at a sort of weak spot, if you will, when it comes to naturally caring about their children. That is, women, they carry their children for 9 months. Then if the mother's nursing, then they're nursing the baby. Women are naturally more attuned right away to care about their babies. Mm-hmm. Now, men who are already at a disadvantage when it comes to that, if they have that already weak connection to their child, right, to their product, to use a crass term, if you will, weakened anymore, just in a natural sense, what you're doing is you're developing a form of sexuality that manipulates men into caring even less about being a father. And in a way that kind of pollutes the whole sexual ecosystem of our culture, that of course opens wide the doors to any other manner of sort of mistaken sexuality, right? So I oftentimes say that contraception is the first instance of fake sex that opened the door to many, many other instances of fake sex. Okay, so we began with condoms, we began with the birth control pill, right? And we severed sexuality from its natural end, if you will. Okay. Then of course we go a step further and you have things like no-fault divorce. You have a promiscuous culture. Eventually you have things like the ultimate fake sex. You might think of pixels on a computer screen, virtual sex, pornography. The first instance of fake sex that of course takes prominence in the 1950s and 1960s with the birth control pill flowers into the contemporary culture that you see today.
To the PeakDay podcast, where we talk about fertility and natural family planning with our friends. Today's guest is Dr. Trish Wawicki.
We're living in a time in life where, until 100 years ago, no one was ever able to say, oh, I want this yummy breakfast and this yummy lunch and this yummy dinner and all these yummy snacks in between. It's just, we're living in this whole new world where this never was an option for people before. And yes, we just can't fill our bodies with junk and expect everything to work well. Yeah. So I'll say this, that and I'm speaking a lot about PCOS because it's so common and I see a lot of this. Mm-hmm. Now, we know that women who have PCOS sometimes are born with a dysfunction at the level of the brain where they don't have a normal FSH, LH pulsatility. Okay. So that's kind of putting them behind the 8 ball. Okay. They're going to have weight loss resistance. They're going to have abnormal reproductive access. So I'm not saying we can always just treat with diet. We do need to use medications a lot of the time. Okay. Mm-hmm. To bring people up to the same starting line. But yes, I do think that diet, just our carb heavy or sugar heavy, diet that we all are swimming in a soup of is largely responsible for a lot of the PCOS that we see today.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you find women and men are going to other sources for kind of like self-education because they're not getting it from their traditional doctor?
Yeah. I think that, and a lot, it's great. I love for patients to have agency and seek out the things that I see a lot of women using books and podcasts and um,
Yeah.
just functional naturopaths and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, how much of your practice involves restorative reproductive health?
About 50%. Yeah, I see. Yeah. So I see a lot of women that just have abnormal cycles and they know that that's a problem. And I mean, and even that I think is a little bit new maybe on the playing field, that it's getting out into the world where no, if you're not having a period every month, or if you're suffering extremely every period, this is a problem. Okay. And we can do things to help you fix it.
Right.
So that is, this kind of the menstrual cycle as a sign of health, ovulation as a sign of health, I think is slowly creeping out into the world.
Yes.
Thank God.
Yeah.
And so I've got, quite a few that just come to me because, they don't understand their cycles. Okay. And they don't understand why they're only bleeding every 60 days. So they just think, okay, correctly, I want to achieve normalcy. A handful of fertility patients, trying to conceive. And then I do some primary care as well, just a lot of mental health, which hormonal balance plays a huge role. Diet plays a huge role. Diet and exercise play a huge role. Different nutritional deficiencies, gut health, all of that.
Welcome to the PeakDay podcast, where we discuss natural family planning and fertility for a lifetime with our friends. Our guest today is Dr. John Bergsma.
Oh, absolutely. I have a wonderful privilege of being able to lecture through typically the Old Testament with our theology majors in the fall, and then that's followed up with a survey of the New Testament in the spring. And most of my teaching is those survey courses where we're just reading through the Bible and establishing kind of basic biblical literacy. And there's so many times when there's an opportunity to talk about this. And the beginning of Exodus is a good example. I always stop and we talk about demographic policy, and we talk about openness to life whenever we begin the book of Exodus, which is usually about 4 weeks into September, late September every year. After we get through Genesis and then hit Exodus, and then we have a little talk there. And then again, when we're working through Leviticus, when you get to Leviticus 15, and I learned this from an NFP class, not from a biblical commentary, but our initial NFP class back in early 93, the teaching couple pointed out that the rules that guided marital relations in Mosaic law, like in Leviticus 15, actually optimize the fertility of the couple, because if you figure out what's going on and when they're able to come together, when they're both ritually clean and when they're ritually unclean and so on, you find out that they have to stay apart during a woman's cycle, and then they come back around PeakDay. Okay. Together, the wife returns to ritual purity and the couple can resume relations, and that would optimize their chances of having a child, which is a great blessing because couples wanted children in the ancient world. Everybody did. Not wanting children is more of a modern thing. But so we stop and we talk about that in Leviticus 15. And in other places as well, it kind of comes up naturally as we're discussing God's plan for marriage and the family. And I really enjoy that. I really cherish the opportunity to be involved in the formation of a new generation of Catholic leaders at Franciscan University. We get a huge number of theology majors, about 500 theology majors at any given time. And that's the largest of any Catholic institution in North America. So we're really privileged, and our students go out and work in dioceses and parishes all over the country and, spread the good news.